The following story has been brought to you by StoriesToInspire.org.
If you ever met Reb Chaim Kanievsky, I was at him many, many times, and I just enjoyed watching him interact. And he interacted with the smallest of the smallest people. People asked silly questions. It was amazing. I once had a driver who wasn't from, and his grandson asked me, "Do you have a driver?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "Bring him in." I said, "He's not from." "No, bring him in." The guy was petrified to come in. He didn't have a yarmulke. He looked around the truck, tender, and he found a baseball cap. And he came in, he was standing in the room of Chaim. There was no other baseball caps. And the Chaim treated him in the exact same way that he treated everybody else. I once went to Rav Shach with my brother-in-law, Rabbi Yitzchak Sorotskin, Badal Chaim, lived to 120, and my brother-in-law, Rebbe Meir, and many more Talmidei Chacham. Big guns in the Torah world. Chaim Mordechai Osban, who was very close to Rav Shach, he's a big Rosh Yeshiva in Israel, and others. A group of 7 or 8. And I brought a Talmud of mine who was a Baal Tshuva. He was already learning in yeshiva. He was a frum, dressed fellow. He was a cousin of Elchanan. And Rav Shach had just said a shir. His shirs were filled with drama, and they were shows. His shir wasn't just a dry shir, fighting. He would present a kasha and then stop. And the whole room erupted. Hundreds and hundreds. Most people didn't know what he was talking about because he spoke Yiddish. In the Panovich, they don't speak Yiddish. I was amazed going there. So everybody says over the kasha to somebody who knows Yiddish, to a guy who doesn't know Yiddish. And then the guy said, "I don't understand the kasha." I do understand the kasha. And then some guys have the guts. They have a teretz to the kasha. So what do? They run over to Rav Shach and they start to fight with him. It's amazing. This Talmud of mine, I'd given him a camera, a video camera, and I told him to video this shir. And if anybody asks you, who told you to do this, just say, the Rosh Yeshiva. That's what you say. Obviously not Rav Shach, but one of the Rosh Yeshiva asks you to do this. If you ask you the name, tell me you don't remember. You could say Rabbi Yisroel, you could say the Kitzer. After the Shir of Ma'ariv, we went to Rav Shach's house, and we started to fight with him about the shir. And it was a nice, warm talk. It was amazing. Rav Shach had the kaiches. And at the end of the shir, ended our discussion, Rav Shach got up, and he walked us all to the door. And my Talmud was standing by the wall, near the door. And Rav Shach didn't give anybody his hand. A couple of people stuck their hands out to him, but he didn't give anybody his hand. Yeah, Charlie, Baruch Shalom. When he came to the door, Rav Shach could barely see. He suddenly turns to this fellow who was standing there like a lump on a log. Was not involved in anything. And he says to him, "Salim Aleichem, Salim Aleichem." And he takes his hand and wraps it in his 2 hands. And I said to him, He asked him for bracha, asked him something. So he asked him, in Hebrew, he gave him hatzlach. It was amazing. This was the guy who was the furthest from Reb Shach in that room. And he went out of his way to give the guy this feelings of greatness many times. I've seen this many times. Choshev b'nei Torah, they look down with a zilzal on somebody who's not in their chevra, who's not one of them, one of their group. You have to know that in every situation, just because you're climbing the ladder, it does not mean that you should not be machshiv everybody. Yisroel Salanter was one time on Yom Kippur in a shul. He didn't have a watch, and he wanted another time. So he turned to one of the mispalim, and he said, "What time is it now?" That man was flying in the clouds. Yom Kippur, the guy was really up there. And because of that, he ignored Rabbi Yisroel Salanter's question. Pasha ignored it. He didn't say, you don't exist. So Rabbi Yisroel tapped him on the shoulder. Said, Yabit, because you're afraid of Yom Adin, I'm guilty. I'm to blame. You can blame me for that. What do you have to do with that? Adarabah. The higher the madrega you become, he said, you should work doubly in zehirus of kavod chavirecha, in giving honor to somebody else. Fakert. That's what you do on Yom Kippur. There's a Chafetz Chaim story. Before the story, his son in the Sefer, Dugma Midarke Avi, in the Kol Kisvei Chafetz Chaim, he says, my father, with all his greatness, his mind was constantly focused on bein Adam l'chaverei, whether in the greatest of matters or in the smallest of matters. Come, let's hear how the Chafetz Chaim conducted himself on Yom Kippur. It was one Yom Kippur, after davening by night. Most people try to be a little serious on that night. Night of Yom Kippur, you want to be in best behavior. You understand it's not a joking time. You don't chat, no chilling. You go home, you go to sleep. Even if you're not such a Gesh Tzaddik, you can have a good Yom Kippur. Chafetz Chaim waits, and everybody marches out of the shul. And the Chafetz Chaim stayed there to continue his avodas HaKodesh. No, and there were some lanterns there that were giving off some light. Suddenly, here's movement. Chafetz Chaim lifts his eyes, turns around, and he sees there's somebody sitting there. Who was sitting there? A nebuch. An alter bacher, a 60-year-old bacher who never got married. He was one of the nebuchs of Radin. And he never had a tzloch in his life in any area. So the Chafetz Chaim decided to put aside all his big avodas HaKodesh And he went to where that bacher was sitting, and he sat down on the bench with him. He put his hand on his shoulder. And he said, Herschel, you had a hard life. Let me tell you about my life. And the Chafetz Chaim began to relate to him all the difficulties that the Chafetz Chaim had from when he was a very young boy. And he had a lot of difficulties. Great child, health, lost his father. People attempted to get him off the derech. He was poor, like anything. And he told him the life of an orphan, what it was like. And he wanted to implant in him Amunah. You can never give up. The future can always turn out good. And they spent most of the night talking. Could you imagine the Chafetz Chaim on the night of Yom Kippur? That's what he's doing. And his son writes, Rabbi Ayaleib writes, there was one year he remembers, the Chafetz Chaim said all the older Bachrim were not yet married. He wants to talk to them after Ma'ariv and after the Tefillah, the Slichas, on Leil Yom Kippur. Yeah? And he wanted to tell them, Mitzvah, this year you're going to get married. This year you're going to find the Zivuk. And you hear such a madrega of people. This is what they did. As big as they were, and on the biggest day, they didn't forget to look down. And not to be mezalzel, to be machshav, to accord respect. There's a story with Reb Nachum Zev of Kelm. The Desslers in Europe, principal named Reb Nachum Zev Dessler. He was a grandson of this Reb Nachum Zev, who was the son of the Alter from Kelm. And he died on a Friday, Erev Shabbos. On Thursday, he was already very sick, and they already felt that his end was coming. And he made a number of preparations before his departure. You know what the common denominator between all of them was? He was worried about others. He spoke to his daughters, gave them chizik, that when he leaves the world, they shouldn't take it too hard. He comforted them. Then he called the wagon driver, and he made up with him, since he feels his end is coming, and either today or tomorrow he's going to depart. He's afraid that because of the big turmoil that's going to happen, they're going to forget to tell his sister, the Tzedkonis, Rebbetzin Nechama Liebe Broide, the wife of the great Reb Tzvi Hirsch Broide, that was sick and stuck in the house. No one's going to notify her about my death. So I want to hire you now. As soon as I die, you go to her house, and you're responsible to bring my sister to the Levi. Hear this? That's not a human being. Not he's paying up his debts. Not he's thinking, do I have any sforim from the yeshiva in my house? I know a couple of people who had that story. From they're dying, they think they have some sforim left in the house. Could I arrange to get them out and put them back where they belong? No. He understood. that you don't, no matter where you are and which position you're holding, even if you're in the Kodesh HaKadosh, you're not forgetting about others, you're not letting it get to your mind. Unbelievable. Rabbi Yisroel Brog, the son of Reb Chaim, writes, Akdama of Nefesh HaChaim, that my father, Reb Chaim Brog, was a Kodesh Kadoshim, Talmud moving from the Gemara. He was so big, it was we can't have no musik what he was. He said when he had his last kaiches, when he was sick like anything, and his eyes were more in Shemayim than they were in the Eretz, he says. He davened and he prayed for people who he knew that were suffering. Yeah. He was thinking about the tsar of the klal and the tsar of the prat. With broken sobs. Any guf who heard Reb Chaim Volozhner was broken from him. Outside, these great tzaddikim, were greater than the great. We get a little involved with ourselves and we forget about everybody else. That's the pshat in this Sefer. And that's something that we need to consider during these Yimei HaSfira, when we have to prepare. If Hashem sends you people who need help, you reach out and help them. Because Baruch should give us the brains to have this awareness so that we can function and we can do the right thing.
Enjoyed this story? Come again. Bring a friend. StoriesToInspire.org